Harry Kane has finally spoken out after England's World Cup exit, and many fans believe his comments were aimed directly at Thomas Tuchel. The England captain hinted that Tuchel's approach was putting too much pressure on the players. But what happened after those comments exposed a growing divide between Tuchel and his squad. Let me catch you up. Wednesday night in Atlanta was supposed to be the night England finally got over the hump. The World Cup final, the first since 1966, sat right there in front of them. Anthony Gordon put them there in the 55th minute, sweeping home across from Morgan Rogers to send 3 Lions fans inside Atlanta Stadium into delirium, putting England on course for the World Cup final against Spain. For half an hour, it looked like it was actually going to happen. Then Tuchel made his move, with England leading 1-0 against the reigning world champions. He pulled Reece James and Declan Rice and sent on defensive reinforcements, Dan Burn and Nico O'Reilly, reshaping his side into a back 5. Following the second half hydration break, Tuchel reshaped his formation by bringing on defensive reinforcements Ezri Konsa, Dan Burn and Nico O'Reilly. The idea was simple: protect the lead, see the game out, get England to a World Cup final without taking any more risks than necessary. It backfired in the cruelest way possible. The conservative approach drew significant criticism as England effectively attempted to protect their slender lead rather than extend it, and the substitutions handed Argentina control of the closing stages, with the South Americans launching wave after wave of attacks. The numbers tell the story better than any pundit could. Between Gordon's scoring and Argentina's winner, England had just 12% possession. 12% for a team that had just taken the lead against the world champions. That's not defending a result. That's drowning. Argentina smelled it. Enzo Fernandez struck first, and it wasn't a scrappy goal either. Fernandez unleashed a spectacular long-range effort to level proceedings in the 86th minute. A 25-yard pile driver. Pickford Dove. It curled past him anyway. 3 minutes after the substitutions had gone in, the lead was gone. Then came the gut punch. Deep into stoppage time, Lautaro Martinez headed home from a Lionel Messi cross, sending the defending champions through and leaving England devastated. Messi at the center of both goals, delivering the kind of moment that ends World Cup dreams. England had gone from 90 minutes away from a final to packing their bags for a third-place match in the space of 1/2 hour spell. Kane fronted the cameras almost immediately. There was no hiding, no delay, no PR-managed statement issued hours later. Captain Harry Kane fronted the media following the final whistle, offering a candid assessment of where England went wrong, saying he was gutted for the boys, gutted for everyone, the team, the staff, the fans. But it's what came next that mattered. Kane didn't just mourn the result. He explained exactly how it happened, and he didn't spare his own team in the process. When we went 1-0 up, we seemed to try and hold on, which at this level is not enough, he admitted. Read that again. The England captain, standing in the tunnel minutes after his country's World Cup dream died, told the world his own team played not to lose instead of playing to win. That's the sentence that set everything else in motion. He went further, revealing the instructions that had actually come from the touchline that night. When we went ahead, the messaging was to go again and get another goal, Kane said. In other words, Tuchel's plan, at least in Kane's telling, was never to sit back. It was to keep pushing. But the team, once ahead, reverted to something else entirely. They stopped pressing. They dropped deep. They handed the ball, and the momentum, straight back to Messi and company. That's the tension sitting right at the heart of this story. A captain saying the messaging was to attack. A back 5 on the pitch that looked like anything but. And a manager who, within hours, would defend every single one of those substitutions without blinking. The chaos of that final half hour has become the reference point for everything said since. Dan Burn, one of the players sent on to shore things up, admitted afterward that the players carry responsibility too, saying he genuinely believed England were going to hold on but conceded the difference was that Argentina had been there before and had the belief. While fine margins decide games at this level, nobody inside that dressing room was pretending it went well. The only question left was who was going to take the blame for it, and Kane had already made it clear where he thought a chunk of that blame belonged. On a team, his own team, that stopped playing football the moment it had something to protect. Once the shock of the scoreline faded, Kane kept talking, and every time he opened his mouth, the picture got clearer. This wasn't a one-off outburst in the tunnel. It was a considered verdict, delivered piece by piece across multiple interviews, about a team that folds the moment fear creeps back in. Start with the language itself. Kane described a team that once ahead stopped trying to win and started trying not to lose. We deserved to be ahead, and then for one reason or another we struggled to keep the ball. Struggled to put pressure on the ball, and it just allowed them to create more momentum and more attacks for them in our final third. He said, adding it's a normal mindset to try to hang on to a one-goal lead. But 20 minutes plus stoppage time is always going to be a long time. Normal mindset, not good enough at this level. That's the crux of Kane's message. England reverted to a defensive crouch out of instinct, out of fear, and it cost them everything. He didn't stop there. Asked what the team could actually take from 6 weeks together, Kane's answer doubled as a confession. We had a lot of good moments in this tournament, a lot of good games, another semi-final. He said, we talk about knocking on the door, we're close. But we just need to find that missing piece in the final stages of the tournament. These tournaments take it out of you, so much effort, pressure, and mentality. We're just missing that final piece. A missing piece, not a missing player, not a missing tactic. Something less tangible, the ability to hold your nerve when a World Cup final is 90 minutes away. And start believing you deserve to be there instead of waiting for it to be taken from you. This is where the pattern becomes impossible to ignore. England have now blown a lead at the exact moment it mattered most, over and over again. England's exit follows a similar pattern to recent tournament defeats, including their last World Cup semi-final against Croatia in 2018, and the Euro 2020 final against Italy, where they took the lead in both games only to lose. 3 different competitions, 3 different managers. If you count Southgate's 2 tournaments and now Tuchel's first. Same script, lead taken, lead protected out of fear, lead lost. And it's not just recent history, it stretches back further than most fans probably remember. Since 1996, England has blown a 1-goal lead in the knockout round of the World Cup or the European Championships 8 times. 8 times, that's not bad luck, that's a habit. A 20-something-year habit of feeling the finish line and instinctively flinching. Kane, to his credit, tried to frame the response diplomatically in the moment. When pressed on whether the team failed to execute the manager's plan, he pointed the finger at Argentina's relentless pressing rather than pure fear. We struggled to get pressure on the ball, especially first half and start of the second half. We pressed them well. We put them under loads of pressure high up the pitch, which then allowed us to win balls and control the game a bit better. He added, after the goal, whether it was them putting more men forward or us not being able to match them man for man. It was just wave after wave. Lads were putting blocks in, but in the end, it just wasn't enough. But strip away the diplomacy and the underlying message stays the same. England had control, England had the ball, England had the lead. And the moment that lead needed protecting, the team's collective nervous system took over and pulled every player deeper into their own box. Further from goal, further from the ball. Further from the version of themselves that had earned the advantage in the first place. That's fear functionally, whatever word Kane chooses to wrap around it in a mixed zone. There's also the personal weight riding on all of this. Kane earned his 120th cap during the tournament's quarterfinal win over Norway, drawing him level with Wayne Rooney and at 32 with the next World Cup 4 years away. This semi-final loss carries a different kind of finality for him than for the younger players around him. Reporters didn't waste time asking him directly whether his international career was done. His answer that it was too soon to say hung over every word he said about the fear that gripped his team in that final half hour. If this really was his last real shot at a World Cup. Watching it slip away because his own side stopped playing on the front foot made the criticism sharper, not softer. Even before the semi-final, there were signs Kane had clocked the problem brewing. After England scraped past Norway in extra time to reach the last 4, Kane relayed a message from Tuchel that suggested the manager himself wasn't satisfied. Even in victory, he just said there in the changing room, "Massive congratulations. We should enjoy it and celebrate. But he knows we can do better," Kane said. Tuchel knew something was missing well before Atlanta. What nobody predicted was that the missing piece would show up not as a lack of quality, but as a lack of nerve at 1-0 up with the clock running down. That's the story Kane told piece by piece, interview by interview. Not one outburst, but a captain building a case in real time. His team had the game won, and out of instinct, out of fear, they let it go. The only person left to respond to that case was the man who made the substitutions that triggered the retreat in the first place. Thomas Tuchel didn't hide from the fallout either. If Kane's message was fear cost England the game, Tuchel's response amounted to a flat refusal to accept that framing, delivered calmly, repeatedly. and without a hint of doubt in his own decision-making. The phrase he kept returning to was simple. Tuchel repeated it to BBC Sports' Kelly Sommers in the immediate aftermath, and he kept repeating it in every interview after that, no regrets. Tuchel repeated those words in the immediate aftermath of England's World Cup exit in an attempt to convince BBC Sports' Kelly Sommers, and the manager himself certainly appeared to believe them. Not a hedge, not a concession that hindsight makes things look worse. A full, repeated stand behind every substitution he made. Asked directly whether his in-game decisions were wrong, Tuchel didn't blink. "No, I believe that's just the nature of the game." Tuchel said, "As soon as you lose, you get criticized. No one knows what would have happened if we made different decisions. So it makes no sense to engage in that and lose my head. I'm responsible for them, I took them, so I take the criticism. That's just the way it is." That's a manager owning the decision without apologizing for it. A very deliberate distinction, and one that put him on a collision course with his own captain's public verdict. Where it gets more interesting is how Tuchel explained the defensive shift itself. He didn't claim it was some tactical masterstroke gone wrong through bad luck. He offered something closer to a psychological read of his own team, and it lines up almost exactly with what Kane was describing, just from the manager's side of the glass. Argentina played with more risk, with more rhythm, with a feeling that maybe they have nothing to lose anymore, Tuchel said. Suddenly we played with a feeling we have a lot to lose. So we dropped into a deep block, which isn't a problem. But we struggled to stay active in that deep block and defend crosses, and struggled to get physical on the runners into the box. Read carefully, that's Tuchel admitting the same emotional collapse Kane pointed to. A team suddenly playing with something to lose instead of something to win, while simultaneously insisting the tactical shape itself wasn't the problem. It's a fine distinction, maybe too fine for a fan base, that watched their team surrender a World Cup semifinal from a winning position. But it's the distinction Tuchel chose to die on. He pushed back hardest against the idea that this defeat fit into some larger, cursed pattern baked into the English game. When reporters raised the Croatia game in 2018 and the Euro 2020 final against Italy, both times England led, both times England lost, Tuchel rejected the framing outright. Tuchel rejected the idea that there is something in the DNA of England's team that leads to such similar failures. I love to see these things in a football matter and through football glasses. So first of all, I always think solvable on the football field. Tuchel said in his news conference, "I don't believe so much in an English thing and in a curse or whatever, or in like history repeating itself in these moments." That's a manager trying to draw a hard line between his substitutions on one specific Wednesday night and 20-something years of English football history. Whether the public buys that distinction is another matter entirely. But Tuchel wasn't interested in inheriting a national curse narrative. He wanted the conversation kept to 11 players and one game plan. He even had a theory for why Argentina handled the moment better than his own side did, and it doubled as an oblique dig at exactly the fear Kane had flagged. Tuchel pointed to something almost cultural in how South American teams approach possession under pressure. "I think it's in the culture basically of the Argentinian team. Of South American teams, this ball possession plays a crucial role." He explained, ball possession taught from a young age, and it's in the DNA. It demands a lot of self-confidence, natural self-confidence to always want the ball, to always be in the gaps, to always define yourself through the ball, through ball possession. The implication sat there without needing to be spelled out. Argentina kept believing in themselves with the ball at their feet, while England, the moment things got tight, stopped wanting it altogether. On the substitutions specifically, Tuchel gave his most detailed defense of the night. He didn't frame the switch as abandoning an attacking plan. He framed it as a read of a team that was already losing its grip on the game before he made a single change. Of course, we wanted to go for the second goal, but I didn't have the feeling that an offensive substitution would help. Tuchel said, "We stayed in our 4-4-2, but we became passive. Became more and more passive, we couldn't keep the ball, so I think it was not a structural problem." In his version of events, the fear had already set in before the subs went on. The changes were a response to a problem, not the cause of one. He closed his post-match remarks the same way he opened them. Accepting responsibility for the decision while refusing to concede it was the wrong one. "You can discuss this with a million coaches," Tuchel continued. "I had to make a decision on the pitch. It's how I analyze the match, and I take the responsibility. At the moment, no regrets. The team gave everything and we were very, very close. I think we deserved to be up 1-0, played one of our better matches. Maybe the best match in the circumstances. We couldn't bring it over the line, but at the moment, no regrets." So there it was, two men hours apart, describing the exact same 20 minutes. In almost the exact same emotional terms, a team suddenly playing with something to lose, and reaching two completely different conclusions about who was responsible for it. Kane pointed at the players losing their nerve. Tuchel pointed at a passive team that had already lost the plot before his defensive substitutions ever hit the pitch. Neither man raised his voice, neither man backed down. And that quiet standoff became the story everyone in English football was talking about by the following morning. If Kane and Tuchel handled the disagreement calmly, absolutely nobody else did. The reaction across social media and the British press turned into one of the loudest pylons English football had seen in years, and almost all of it landed squarely on the manager's shoulders. Broadcaster Mark Goldbridge didn't dress it up at all, posting bluntly that the manager should be sacked that same night, arguing sack Tuchel tonight. No point in being here if he's just going to do that, get out. That was one of hundreds of similar posts circulating within minutes of the final whistle. Journalist Laurie Whitwell zeroed in on the tactical repetition, pointing out that Tuchel had gone for the same defensive strategy as against Mexico earlier in the tournament, without appreciating that Argentina had the attacking ability to unpick a low block over 30 minutes, calling it a pitiful way to exit the World Cup at this stage. Journalist Julian Lorenz went further still, saying plainly that as much as he liked Tuchel personally, the defeat was on him, adding Tuchel and England got what they deserved in the end. Miguel Delaney's take cut at something more specific. The entire rationale for hiring Tuchel in the first place. I think that is close to sackable from Tuchel, he wrote. A coach appointed at great expense for his tactical acumen and ability to get over the line. Needlessly forces England miles from it, all that money for that. That's the sharpest version of the criticism, not just that the substitutions were wrong, but that they contradicted the entire reason the FA brought in a foreign, tactically obsessed manager over an English alternative in the first place. Jack Pitbrook drew the comparison to England's previous semi-final exit, arguing this one hurt worse precisely because there was less excuse for it. This is so much worse than Croatia 8 years ago, he wrote. England were a better team here in a better position with better options. And they just decided to do nothing after going 1-0 up. Back five tactics as if this was just endless crosses to Raul Jimenez again. Veteran reporter Henry Winter's framing leaned into the emotional register instead of the tactical one, closing his report from Atlanta with the blunt line that Argentina deserved the victory. England didn't, Tuchel didn't, and singled out the substitutions specifically, those subs. Even pundit Tim Vickery, appearing on BBC's coverage, put the loss down to the same decision everyone else kept circling back to, telling viewers England had Argentina exactly where they should have wanted them, before laying the blame for the defeat on Tuchel's substitutions. That's not one angry fan account, that's broadcasters, national newspaper journalists, and BBC football pundits all converging on the same conclusion within hours of full time, independent of each other, arriving at the same read Kane had already offered in the mixed zone. A team with the game won, retreating out of fear, and a manager whose calls accelerated the collapse instead of preventing it. Against all of that noise, the Football Association did something almost nobody expected. Nothing. No emergency statement threatening review, no hint of a departure. FA Chief Executive Mark Bullingham went in front of cameras and delivered praise instead of panic, saying it was heartbreaking to be so close, and that the players and Thomas gave it everything, with the squad, coaches, and staff unable to have worked harder during the tournament. That backing wasn't improvised in the moment either, it had been locked in months earlier. The mood heading into the tournament was pretty boisterous. The FA were so concerned about Tuchel getting poached by an elite club, they handed him a contract extension through the 2028 European Championship, all the way back in February. In other words, the FA had already bet big on Tuchel before a ball was kicked at this World Cup. Worried some Champions League giant would come calling. Not that England might crash out with the game in hand. That contract now sat there as an anchor, regardless of how loudly Goldbridge, Delaney, or the back pages screamed for a change. Multiple outlets reporting from inside the camp confirmed the same thing in the hours after elimination. This wasn't going to end in a sacking. Sources told ESPN that Tuchel is set to stay on as England head coach through Euro 2028 after retaining the backing of the Football Association. Despite the team's World Cup semi-final exit, other reports painted the same picture of an organization that had already made peace with sticking by its man regardless of how this particular tournament ended. The FA are thought to have been encouraged by the positive environment Tuchel has created, with players praising his demanding but professional approach, while his rapport with supporters has grown during the tournament. So England woke up the next morning to a strange split screen. On one side, a captain who'd publicly diagnosed his own team's collapse as a failure of nerve. On the other, a governing body publicly insisting the man who made the calls in that collapse wasn't going anywhere. Two very different verdicts on the same 20 minutes, both delivered with total conviction, both refusing to blink first. With the final gone, England were left with the least satisfying fixture in football. The third-place playoff, this time against France in Miami Gardens. While Argentina go on to Sunday's World Cup final against Spain, England are left with the consolation of Saturday's third-place match against France in Miami Gardens, Florida. It's the kind of match nobody wants to play, and every neutral forgets happened within a week. But for a squad still processing exactly how close they came, it mattered more than the neutral would ever guess. Kane, for his part, wasn't ready to draw a final line under any of it just yet. Not the tournament, and not necessarily his international career either. Asked directly whether this World Cup was his last shot at the trophy, he wouldn't commit either way, telling reporters it was too soon to decide if this was his last World Cup. At 32, with Euro 2028 sitting 2 years away, and co-hosted on home soil across England, Scotland, Wales, and Ireland, there's an obvious pull to stick around for one more shot at ending the wait. That now stretched past 6 decades. That home tournament looms over everything that comes next. Tuchel already had one eye cast towards the competition, which will be co-hosted by England, Scotland, Wales, and the Republic of Ireland. Everything said in Atlanta, Kane's diagnosis of fear, Tuchel's insistence there's no regrets, gets reheated the moment that tournament kicks off on home turf, in front of the exact crowd that just watched their team retreat from a winning position on the biggest stage in the sport. The pattern Kane pointed to hasn't broken yet, and that's really the thread the FA, the fans, and Tuchel himself now have 2 years to try and cut. 8 blown leads since the mid-90s. 3 semifinals and a final lost from winning positions across the last 3 major tournaments alone. Tuchel says it's solvable on the football field, not some inherited curse. Kane says the missing piece isn't tactical, it's mental. The belief to keep playing on the front foot once the scoreboard says you don't have to anymore. What's genuinely unresolved is whether those two explanations can actually coexist inside the same camp for another 2 years, without one of them eventually giving way. Tuchel has the contract, the FA's public backing, and a squad that, by most accounts, still likes playing for him. Kane has a diagnosis that every fan who watched that back 5 retreat in Atlanta instinctively agrees with, whether or not he ever repeats it publicly again. Neither man walked back a word. Tuchel kept telling anyone who asked that he had no regrets, and that this wasn't some structural sickness unique to England. Kane kept explaining calmly and repeatedly that his team stopped playing to win, the moment they had something to protect. 2 verdicts on the same 20 minutes in Atlanta, both still standing, both waiting to be tested again the next time England find themselves ahead. With the clock running down and a nation daring to believe again, thank you for watching. If you enjoyed watching this video, click on one of the boxes playing on your screen to watch more similar content.